Passionate, outspoken, insightful. Ariva Martin is an award-winning civil rights attorney, best-selling author, legal commentator, and America's advocate. Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report.
Good morning and welcome to our viewers in the U.S. and around the world. To kick off this morning's broadcast, do me a favor, share the show with your online friends or start a viewing party. And remember to post a comment or question. Your voice matters and we want to hear from you. Today, we are talking about Black women, the workplace, and race. You have seen the posts from big companies and brands expressing their commitment to Black Lives Matter and anti-racism. But some employees are speaking up and saying the public rhetoric doesn't match their internal policies and practices. Some say, in fact, that many of America's most trusted companies and brands are hotbeds of racism and toxicity for Black women. Black women have been traumatized in the workplace and in certain community settings, and they are speaking out and taking action. Let's discuss. My first guest is Lisa Johnson. She is a public speaker, a coach, and author of the bestseller Game Plan. She and members of her book club sued the Napa Valley Wine Train for race discrimination after they were kicked off the train for making, get this, too much noise. Welcome, Lisa, and thank you so much for joining me this morning. I'm a civil rights lawyer. I've seen a lot of lawsuits, but a lawsuit against a train company because you were making too much noise. Tell us what happened.
You know, unfortunately, I won't be able to crosswalk the story, but ultimately, I feel like it was an implicit bias on laughing while Black, right? Which is the hashtag that we created to kind of chronicle the events that happened. It's unfortunate that Black joy can't even be expressed in this country in a way where we're just a group of Black women just reading books and just trying to enjoy ourselves. So
I know what I read about this lawsuit and what captured my attention was it looked like this group of Black women, and what I read were you guys called yourselves the Sisters on the Reading Edge Book Club, that you guys boarded this train in Napa Valley, and I've been on this train actually, so I know it's this really fun experience. You get on it, you drink wine, you eat, you have a good time, and you get to tour wine country. And from the accounts that I read, you all were on the train, and I guess some non-African American people were making complaints that you were somehow too loud. You were making too much noise, and you actually were kicked off the train. And I know that there was a statement posted on social media that basically accusing you all of physically and verbally attacking some of the members on the train. But I also know that that statement was taken down pretty quickly and an apology was issued. And the reason I want to talk with you is because in this moment, you know, every company is examining their policies. They're talking about how they stand with Black Lives Matter. And having been through an experience where you felt like you were singled out because you are a Black woman, what does this moment, you know, feel like for you? Does it feel like we're going to really make some change?
Yes, finally, I feel like the needle is shifting. I feel like we as Black women, Black people are taking back our power in a way. I think we recognize that nobody's coming to save us. This is up to us to really step into our Blackness, have confidence in it, and demand what it is that we want in this country, which is acknowledgement and respect. I think it's been a long time coming, and I am glad to be living as we start to shift the needle a little bit in this movement.
And I know you can't talk about the particulars of the lawsuit. Having followed the lawsuit very carefully and closely, I know that there was actually a settlement that was reached. And as many of these lawsuits, when they're settled, they're confidentiality agreements that prevent the parties from talking about the details. But I do want to ask you just about how, as a Black woman, you felt in that moment of, feeling like you were being singled out and treated differently, because one of the things we see white people grappling with is trying to understand through the lenses of Black people what it feels like, when you're the only one or when you are singled out in a crowd for doing something that's so normal, laughing, talking, but yet, you're treated so differently for doing those things that we accept as normal, when it relates to anyone other than Black people.
Absolutely. I think that, sometimes the best life lessons for anybody and all of us will come to us wrapped in sandpaper. And I remember when I was in the experience, it was like, okay, why me? And one of the things about me is I'm always questioning, what can I do better, right? So I'll be a good or bad in any life experience. I'm always looking for how I can shift to make it better or not do that again if it's worse. And when I was reaching for that level of inspiration or something to come from inside of me to tell me what I could do, and nothing came up. And I absolutely said, you know what, not on my watch. I have to say something because people are watching. My granddaughter was watching, and it was one of the most demoralizing, dehumanizing experiences that I've ever felt in my life. But I knew that I had to put my shoulders back and stand up for all Black women, little girls, and everybody who looked like me, because I had to say, not on my watch. And I remember at first feeling like I'm not really equipped to do this, right? And then I had to say to myself, you know what? I have everything I need to sit at every table in every room that I'm invited to. So if this is what I'm supposed to do, then I need to stand up and say over and over again, not on my watch. This is not how we are going to be treated. I feel like sometimes in this country, we've created spaces that look like white space, so to speak, where they don't believe that women of color can come into that space, and they saw our laughter and our joy as a disruptor. And we all have a right to laughter. We all have a right to joy. And that is just something that I refuse to allow them to take from me, which is why I continue to go to Napa and enjoy the wineries and all of those things.
What do you think in lawsuits? Again, I know as a civil rights lawyer that lawsuits, particularly civil lawsuits, that they're money damages that are awarded. Nobody goes to jail. Nobody it's not a criminal lawsuit where somebody is actually prosecuted and they end up going to jail. They're about civil damages, but civil lawsuits can be powerful, and they can force companies and organizations to change. What were you hoping would be the change in this company and any that were paying attention to this lawsuit by filing this action? What change were you hoping would be made?
I think all companies, they only understand one language, and that's the bottom line, and that's revenue. And so if that's what it took to help any organization make that shift, then we were willing to, get out there and say, okay, let's speak their language. But on the flip side of that, it's about trying to evoke organizations just to see the humanity in us as Black people, but also to have those really tough conversations that need to be had around implicit bias. We are all like sponges when it comes to what we see on social media, the television, what we're taught, and those things are taught to us, and those are the undercurrents that play a big role and a big part in all the decisions that we make and how we interact with people. And so it's important for us all to acknowledge that they exist and not have to defend our moral character just because they do, so that we can open up that dialogue that is much needed in this movement to make a shift in this community, in this racial landscape that we're in right now. And so I believe that we, again, as Black people, we have to save ourselves, meaning we have to step into our power, be confident in our Blackness, but we have to do that side by side with our allies because they're in positions of power that are going to be able to help us make those shifts. So not coming from a place of that they're giving us anything. It's just that, hey, this is our right. You know what? We want to stand next to you, not behind you, as we have been, kind of delegated to do in the past.
And I'll just end with this. We've seen so many women, African-American women, that have come forward, in the wake of George Floyd's horrific murder, that murder that we watched played out on television. We've seen women, Black women, coming forward, talking about toxic work environments, talking about negative experiences they've had in the community. We've seen all these stories about Karen, people just bird watching, barbecuing, walking their dogs, doing all kinds of normal things, but yet having, being attacked just because of the color of their skin. What would you tell someone that has had one of those experiences? How would you tell them to move forward from one of those experiences?
I think focusing on self-care and healing is a requirement, right? I had to do the inside out work to be able to stand up and talk about this in a way, because again, it was one of the most demeaning, demoralizing, humiliating experiences of my life. And I started to question a lot of things about myself in terms of how I showed up in the world, how I have the privilege too of living in the suburb, the way that I raised my children, all these things that I said to them about, you don't need to have any interaction with the police if you're a good person, you go to school, you're educated and all those things. Yet here I am with a master's degree standing in the dirt for laughing. So, it just makes you have to look at who you are and be confident in who you are when you step out of your house every day, so that you're not allowing the outside world to really dictate how you show up. And I just believe that, you have to make sure that you're investing in your healing, right? Because even if America decides that they don't want to acknowledge what they've done to our ancestors, it's up to us to take a place of, you know what, we're going to march and we're going to move forward anyway. Right? We're not waiting for you to acknowledge it to decide that it was traumatic for us. And so, yeah, that's what I believe, is just making sure that I come from a place of healing and making sure that I was able to take my power back so that I could use my voice in the way that I feel like it needs to be used.
Thank you so much, Lisa. You have your power, no doubt about that. You are exuding power, and anyone listening to this interview will see that you were able to reclaim that. And again, thank you for being willing to share your story. Thank you for standing up. Thank you for using that humiliating experience to be a teachable moment for that company, but also for other companies who I'm sure have found themselves in very similar situations. You be safe out there and keep speaking truth to power. We really appreciate your voice.
Thank you so much.
My next guest started a viral discussion on the toxic workplace at the popular women-focused media brand Refinery29. Her tweets caused over 100 Black women to share their stories of sexism and racism with the company, and ultimately sharing those stories led to the editor-in-chief and the founder stepping down. Joining me is Ashley Edwards. Good morning, Ashley.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for joining me. I was just blown away when I read about your tweet and what happened in terms of how many other women started to come forward and tell their stories. But before we talk about the tweet, tell us, what is Refinery29?
The Refinery is a women's focused media company that does content around fashion, beauty, work, women asking for more. We also, when I was there, I was a news and politics editor. So it's really focused on women, feminism, about women claiming their power, essentially.
And how long did you work there?
I worked there for a year and a half.
And this June 2nd tweet that you posted changed the world in a lot of ways. It definitely rocked the world of Refinery29. So what was the impetus? Like, what triggered you to go out and talk about your experiences there?
Absolutely. So I haven't worked at Refinery in about a year, over a year. I work at Google now, but I was just talking to some friends who work there and who previously worked there on June 2nd when Refinery blacked out their home screen in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. And it kind of just triggered me, because as somebody who worked there as a Black woman, I realized that this was very performative. They were kind of catering to people's sensibilities. So let's black out the homepage, but internally, they're not very supportive of their Black and other people of color employees at all.
So in your tweet, you call them out for not paying Black employees fairly. You talk about the lack of Black leadership at the organization. And then you talk about these daily microaggressions that you suffered. Give us some examples of what that workplace was like.
As a Black woman, I feel like I've experienced microaggressions all through my life, but it wasn't until recently that I had a word for it. Like, these are things that happen to us on a daily basis that we just don't have words for. But one thing I experienced was being told I was rude over Slack. And when I asked about how to correct that, how I was being rude, my manager at the time didn't really have an answer for me. And other Black employees who were there around the same time as me had similar complaints about their managers telling them they were rude on Slack or short on Slack. So it starts with tone policing, telling us that we're not speaking kindly enough. And then that, you start to internalize that. I started to think, am I being rude? How do I come off? Am I abrasive? And it was really hard. It took a while for me to understand that it really wasn't about me. It was about the person saying it. And I had to just let it go and realize that I'm not really doing anything wrong here.
Now, once you posted this tweet, like thousands of retweets and thousands of comments, and then other African American women that formerly worked at Refinery 29 started posting their own tweets. We, stalked the page, and we found this tweet from Cecily, who said, "This is the official publication of white feminism, but violently clueless about race." So I think for those of us that know Refinery 29 and think of it as this hip, this cool, brand that caters to millennials, and that is so socially conscious, it's kind of shocking to hear that one of, former Black employees saying that they were not just clueless, but she used the word violently clueless about race. Was that your experience as well, that they were just tone deaf when it came to issues of race?
I especially experienced things that were very tone deaf, but other employees experienced things that were far worse than me. I was in a position of somewhat power while I was there. I was in management, but other junior employees had worse experiences, from verbal and to physical violence. One of the somebody in management reaching out and touching a Black woman's hair, confusing Black women for each other. These are really, really egregious things. And I feel like I was lucky that the experiences I had were way less than those. And I can only imagine there's so many other stories that women have, but they're not coming forward, because especially in media, it's an industry where if you're seen as a troublemaker, it might be hard for you to get a job. You don't want to be seen as the girl who's starting trouble, or the woman who's raising her voice. So for a lot of people and a lot of Black women, it's just like, it's better to be silent for them. And I totally understand and respect people's need to not come forward sometimes.
Yeah, you talk about one of the employees having the experience of being, confused for another Black woman. I think it was Shannon Hargrove in one of her tweets who said the editor-in-chief asked her first to apologize to white women for an article that she had written about appropriating gold chains. And she also said that she was often confused for another Black woman. And I guess that was one of the things that struck me as I was really digging in and doing the research on Refinery 29. It seemed to be that the top editors had a type of Black woman that they wanted to, feature and focus on the media platform. And they mentioned Janelle Monáe, and they mentioned Black women who were fair-skinned or had small body shapes, but that if you were a darker skinned woman and if you had a larger body frame, you weren't the perfect image. Did you find, again, that to be your experience while you were there, that there was, the light, bright Black people were okay, but the dark skinned Black people, were rejected?
Absolutely. And from my experience, I could see the difference between how I was treated versus other Black women. I definitely have a lot of privilege and had a lot of privilege while I was there. I'm light skinned. For a lot of people who have these prejudices, I'm a more palatable type of Black woman for them. And just from reading through those experiences, a lot of them I had known, but hearing some of these horrible things, I see the clear difference in how I was treated versus other Black women. And I think it's very obvious the type of Black woman that they want to be kind of the face to show that there's diversity. But in reality, when it comes to us speaking up and trying to make change, they don't really like that.
Do you know if while you were there, if, African-American women ever went to Kristen, is that her name? That was the editor-in-chief?
Christine.
If people, if women went to Christine and said, look, this environment is toxic, or here are some of the issues that we're having, could your voices be heard? If people try to...
This was kind of like an open secret. My writers and we openly discussed these issues while I was there. The Black women there openly discussed these issues while there. I know personally that several Black women and other women of color went to HR to raise their concerns about things, and nothing was ever done. Thankfully, with pressure from the Refinery 29 union, Vice has launched a formal investigation into all these allegations. So hopefully we'll see more action beyond just Christine resigning. There are several other people there who are complicit in perpetuating this environment, and there needs to be change.
Yes, it's kind of interesting. I went to Christine's page as well as I was just, researching this story, and she had lots of reposts on her page. Like she reposted, something from Ava DuVernay. She posted things about George Floyd. There was some posts where she told her white friends to pull up So, I mean, she seems to be a person who is trying, at least from her social media page, to be socially conscious. So, is this Christine, the two sides of Christine, the one that publicly talks about being a justice ally, and then the one who's running an organization that doesn't respect, Black women in the workplace? Is that what was going on?
I don't know what was in Christine's heart, and I don't want to label her as somebody who's a bad person. She may have made a mistake. She may have been blinded to her own privilege, but I do know for a lot of people and a lot of companies and brands, it's easier to post a picture on Instagram that's nice and happy of two hands holding and say that you're in support of Black women and of Black lives. It's much harder to actually do it in practice. And I think that is what we're seeing now, that we're tired of this performative allyship and we want real actionable change, meaning promoting Black women, paying Black women more, auditing how much you've been paying Black women over a course of years to see these systemic problems you've been having. It's nice to post something on Instagram and support, but it's another thing to actually do the work. And I don't think Christine is the only founder or person who needs to really evaluate what they're doing here.
And so just lastly, Ashley, what do you hope this moment? I mean, we're in this post George Floyd murder moment where, again, companies and brands and, CEOs and leaders, companies around the country are, so they tell us, grappling with how they make this moment count and how they really start to dismantle some of the systemic racism that we know has permeated workplaces and has resulted in what you just said. Black women still make 67 cents for every dollar that a white man makes. I mean, that just blows my mind when you think about, we're sitting here in 2020, Black women, the most educated people on this planet. There's not a Black CEO of a Fortune 500 company at this moment. I mean, there've only been like 17 in the last Black people, period, and Black women, the number is so just ridiculously small. You're someone that now, you said you were in leadership at that company, you're in leadership in a big tech company now. What do you hope this moment means for those companies that might be serious about making this moment count?
I think it needs to become it's not just a moment, it has to be a movement, and companies really need to evaluate how they're treating their employees of color, specifically Black employees in this moment right now. And that starts with, it's very simple, paying people fairly, evaluating how much you've been paying people, putting people on track to promotion, really creating developmental programs so you can get more Black women and people of color into your company. And then not only just getting them there, retaining them. If you're hiring Black people and they're leaving after a year and a half, that's a problem there. It has to go beyond fun Instagram posts. It has to go beyond statements. It needs to be actionable change. And that starts with pay. That starts with money right there.
Well, you definitely started something. It's not often that one tweet can cause 100 Black women to come forward, and it definitely isn't often that a tweet can cause a founder of a big media brand to step down and to say she's going to do some self-reflection. So hopefully this moment will not be lost on Refinery 29 in any company. I want to ask you to just hang tight in the green room, Ashley, because I'm going to talk to our next guest, but I want to bring you back on when I bring on Dr. Tama Bryant. So we're going to talk about healing and what these microaggressions, mean to African-American women in the workplace. So sit tight for me. My next guest is Ella Gorgla. She is a beauty executive and co-founder of 25 BWB. Ella's article, Black Women Have Been Traumatized in the Workplace, went viral, garnering over 100,000 impressions on Instagram. Good morning, Ella. How are you?
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I have been all over social, tracking, looking for, searching for, stories of Black women who are speaking out about their experiences, trying to, figure out what's going on in this moment and what it means, particularly for African-American women. And I ran across your article. So what prompted you to write this really compelling piece about Black women and trauma in the workplace?
First of all, thank you for having me and allowing me to share our story. I wrote the article and I, specifically used the word trauma because I think too often we're timid with our pain and we're too timid with the experiences we've had. I mean, I, that article was born out of my own personal experiences and observations, and racial trauma is real. The trauma that happens due to microaggression in the workplace, it's real, and I felt that it was important to call it what it is.
What are some of those experiences that you've had in the workplace, Ella?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a broad range, and so I'll say personal experiences and public observations. I mean, failure to promote is something that weighs heavy. I mean, you just mentioned that with your previous guest. So many talented Black women who are in the industry who simply are not being promoted and elevated and seen and heard. So that was my own personal challenge. I actually left my former employer because of that. And I channeled all of my energy into creating 25 Black Women in Beauty, which has been incredibly successful. But also the slights that, if you will, the microaggression, being ignored, being passed over, or outright just comments about race and features, whether it's your hair or your lips, both things that I personally experienced, or mocking elements of Black culture that we ought to be valuing. I think too often you see that, and it's not really, no one is held to account, if you will. Yeah, so that inspired the article, and I mean, just the comments alone were heartbreaking. Women, feeling confident enough to come forth with their own private experiences, and even more so realizing that they weren't imagining those things, which was pretty profound. It wasn't my imagination, and then seeing that there were other women who had shared experiences. It's really gone somewhat viral. Yes.
I want to ask you, Ella. Ashley talked about her realizing that she had certain privileges in the workplace because of her fair skin.
Mm-hmm.
And that when she started to see the posts from former employees at Refinery 29, she realized that her experience, as bad as it was even different from some of the other, women in that workplace who were darker skinned than her. So is that a part of your experience? Because people don't think colorism still exists. Some people, think that we're so past that. And what I found reading some of the comments under your article was that is such a big issue in the workplace. So have you had that personal experience?
Yeah, so I would say colorism in the workplace does unfortunately still exist, and perhaps it's more common in industries like beauty that are so forward facing. I would say my experience, I felt it was just color for me, not necessarily. Although you certainly observe that folks who were in senior level positions, I guess now that I look back on it, were of the fair hue, right? They were all light skinned. And even for Latinas, I one thing I recognize is that they were all very, very fair. For Indians who had high roles, they were always very fair. So these are difficult conversations, but these are conversations that have to happen. So I would say yes, it certainly, I think it did play a role.
Did you have any expectation that this article would go viral and that literally thousands of women would start sharing it and posting comments and really telling their very personal stories about being discriminated against and having felt assaulted, really, in some instances in the workplace?
Yeah. I did not expect it because oftentimes, when you write, it's like I write because I have no other option. I have to express myself. And for me, there was a deep sense of, I don't know, I felt that the public story that was being put forth about this particular company wasn't my own private experience. And it was painful to me because I felt like there was a real lack of honesty there. And I also wanted to be brutally honest about what we as Black women were experiencing. And it really was just meant to be a post. And then I started getting emails. where's the rest of the article? Where's the rest of the story? And so I expanded it into a full article that has also been widely shared. We don't talk about Black women and trauma in the workplace. It exists. It really does have lasting effects. And I didn't want to just put it out there because I felt a responsibility once I put that out there and people were sharing their stories and revisiting this pain, that it was time to actually start healing from it, right? We needed to
Are
go
you
through the
willing to
process of
share
healing.
the company that you originally identified?
I'm sorry?
Are you willing to share the name of the company that you originally posted about?
It was Estee Lauder Companies.
So you worked for Estee Lauder.
Yes. I worked for
So-
Estee Lauder for approximately 5 years. And my story isn't necessarily a new one for them. I mean, I left and I made it very clear that I was leaving under these conditions. And I expressed, deep discontent, not with my own personal treatment, but with the treatment of all Black women, a number of Black women that were there. So I shared my story, I did. But I knew I needed to get it out because we were in this movement where obviously what was happening with Black Lives Matter and the tragic murder of George Floyd, sort of this reckoning was now happening in corporate America. And how can I be a part of an organization and sort of be a part of the story and not tell, to some extent, my truth? Although you just asked me, I never really shared in the story who I worked for, so I guess I'm somewhat revealing it now. So
things like that happen on a special report.
I know, it's like,
you're in a safe space.
Yes. So I guess it's out. And but the number of women who are still coming forth with their own stories is like, now we have a responsibility to heal. And what I proposed in healing was somewhat provocative because we have to acknowledge that we've been through this trauma. A lot of us put it away, we pack it away, and we don't talk about it. So acknowledge, and I had to do that for myself. Like, Ella, you've been traumatized in the workplace. And the second step, which is my next step in my own journey of healing, is really confronting my employer, if you will, in the sense that letting them know, not just of the indignities, but that you have traumatized me based on this environment that was created. And I actually want you to be a part of my healing. I think it's somewhat provocative, but they call it, you'll have a psychiatrist that'll talk about this deeply, but they call it prolonged exposure therapy, just really facing your trauma. And it's something that I felt very passionate about.
Yeah, and I want to bring in, you mentioned a psychologist. I have my very good friend, a very well-respected psychologist, minister, professor, author. She's joining us today, and I wanted her to be a part of this conversation because I consider her to be one of the foremost experts on African-American women and trauma. She was recently featured in Essence magazine for her work around Black women mental health and wellness. She's Dr. Thema Bryant. Good morning, Dr. Thema Bryant Davis. Thank you so much for joining us. And we have Ashley, she's come back into the conversation. And I wanted Ashley and Ella to be able to talk to you, Dr. Thema, because I truly believe you to be one of the foremost experts on this issue. And we hear, you've been in the waiting room, so you've heard Ella talk about her trauma and the things that she's doing to heal. So what can you share with us about what Ashley and Ella and Lisa and literally hundreds of thousands of Black women around this country are now speaking up about in terms of microaggressions and the pain, the trauma that they experience in the workplace?
As we engage as Black women in our labor, our career or vocational labor, we are also doing a lot of emotional labor that is unrecognized, and it is pervasively in a hostile environment. And we have often been taught to mask, even as girls, we are taught to mask our emotions, to never let them see you sweat, to never let them think they had an impact on you. And because we have lived so much of our lives behind these masks, we don't fully take in the full impact of the stress and the trauma. And it has become in a lot of ways normative. It's like a rites of passage of this is what it means to work in corporate America. And it is really important for us to, in this season, give ourselves the space and the luxury of healing, that many of our foremothers never got that space. and for us to claim it for ourselves, to recognize our mental health matters. And even if we are accumulating titles and resumes and financial resources, we have to ask the question, at what cost? And so many of us are living with depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, trying to numb the pain with food or with substances, or just shutting down, emotionally numb. And so sometimes we will say, I'm not aware of or really tuned into the impact that this has had, but it builds over time, even as you name microaggressions and the examples that you all spoke of, that sometimes if people hear about one of those instances in isolation, they may say, oh, you just brush it off, but it builds over time. Often it is supported and maintained and spoken by persons who are in power, and it is meant to destabilize and dehumanize us. And so a part of us honoring our humanity is speaking the truth that this is not okay. And often we are not okay, even though we have learned to quote unquote wear it well. And so I was glad that you raised exposure therapy, which is about us confronting the memories, the things that we often tuck away. And so looking at it, and then from a narrative therapy perspective, learning to tell our stories, which is why I'm so glad you have created this platform for people to be able to speak those things that we have kept silent, because the secrecy is also painful, because then we turn it in and hold it as shame, and it is not our shame to carry.
Yeah, I thought what Ella said was I just thought amazing, that she said a part of her healing was to get this company to be involved in it, to confront them. Is that something that is common? And how do you recommend that other women do what Ella has done? Because Ella seemingly has turned her pain, into purpose, and now is helping so many other women do the same.
Definitely. One of the differences between liberation psychology or Black psychology and Western psychology is we teach not just coping with oppression, but resistance to oppression. So yes, we want to tend to our emotional wounds, but we also want to problem solve and be strategic, whether for ourselves or for those who will come after us. And so really being able to think through, how can I use my voice? How can I identify allies in this place so that we can shift the tide? Because we don't want to just continue to orient our daughters to believe this is what it looks like or has to look like to be a Black woman working in America.
So Ella, what do you want to ask of Dr. Thema? You seem like you're already, you're starting the healing work, but do you have anything that you feel like you could continue to learn and benefit as you go on this journey?
Yeah, I think what struck me as I was exploring, I guess, this piece is that so many of us don't call it what it is. I was actually quite stunned when I was just doing my research, because I'm like, I can't just write my own words without doing some research. And I saw this definition of PTSD and how like small incidents can also lead to trauma. Why don't we talk about that enough? Workplace trauma. There are very few articles actually that are out there that talks about not like big incidents that happen in the workplace that lead to trauma, but microaggression and racial trauma.
It really is how the term emerged. And so when we first developed post-traumatic stress disorder, it was in response to veterans. Mm-hmm. And so the idea was post-trauma, they leave battle, they come home, and we help them recover. So there was pushback when people started saying, well, what about domestic forms of trauma, like sexual assault, like intimate partner violence, like school shootings? And at first people didn't want to honor that. And they would say, well, they haven't gone to war. That's not like going to war. But people advocated for it to be acknowledged as such. And so now when we look at what some call societal trauma or the trauma of oppression, there are some traditional trauma psychologists who don't want to acknowledge oppression or workplace harassment as forms of trauma. They say, oh, you're going to dilute it, that's a little t trauma, and this is a big T trauma. And it really is remarkable that when people are not the target of something, they can try to call it little t or minimize it when it is a form of oppression that is affecting mass groups of people. And when we think about trauma as needing to overwhelm our resources, so we have everyday stress, but then traumatic stress. So traumatic stress overwhelms my normal ability to cope. And most of us have figured out how to manage everyday stress. But then these incidents come up that really do create a sense of hopelessness or powerlessness or despair, or make you question yourself. And so it is about those within the field advocating for their acknowledgement in terms of the impact they do have.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and one of the things I was curious about, and I'm thinking about with respect to Ashley. So Ashley's moved on to a new job, Dr. Thema. She's out of that toxic environment at Refinery 29, but we know that that toxic workplace is not, confined to that Refinery 29 company, that there's toxicity in so many workplaces. So what do you say to someone like her that may experience something very similar in her new workplace? Obviously we can't just go from job to job to job. That's not an option for a lot of people. They have to work, they have to pay their bills, they have to feed their families. So if you find yourself in one of these toxic work environments, what do you do to cope?
So it is so important that we find wells that really nourish us outside of the workplace. Because while it is helpful and it's a wonderful thing, if we land in a place that is nourishing to us, for us to show up already well fed. And so whether that is tending to our emotional well-being with therapy, with self-help books, whether it's our spiritual practice, some people start the day with meditation or with prayer. Social support is very important because sometimes we need a reality check. We're sitting in these meetings and off the wall things are happening and you're sitting there like, is it me? Because everyone else is going on like nothing just happened. So it's wonderful when you have that girlfriend, that sister friend that you can call and describe the circumstance to, one, just for validation or support, but also for advisement to be able to get wise counsel. Because even if we may be one of the first in that particular company, there are many sisters who have walked this path ahead of us and brothers as well who can help us to navigate it. And I would say it's important to know our identity is not defined by our supervisors or people we work with. That if we put our self-esteem in their hands, they will drop us every time. And so reminding ourselves of our worth and our value, even when we're in an environment that does not.
Ashley, do you have anything you want to ask Dr. Thema about your healing process? Because you're also talking very publicly about this. And that has to be scary because, like you said, you're in the media industry and talking publicly about a big brand can be kind of frightening to one's career.
Absolutely. And I initially was very afraid when I started speaking out, thinking it was going to somehow impact my current job. Thankfully, I'm in a job right now where I'm surrounded by really supportive people. My managers and directors are all very supportive of what I'm doing. My question is, how do I balance? Part of why I spoke out was because I felt like I had been silent in times that I should have spoken out more forcefully. How do I balance using my privilege to help other Black women in their careers and in the workplace, and also with, not burning myself out, because it's a marathon, not a sprint, and things don't change overnight.
I really appreciate both the comment and the question. One, I appreciate you sharing that you've landed on good soil. And I think it's important for people to hear that because sometimes we stay in a toxic place because we say every place is going to be like this. So why leave here? It's terrible everywhere. And while racism and sexism exist everywhere, it's to varying degrees. So not every place is as severe as another. So I appreciate you sharing that part of your story. And then this part about using our privilege, using our platform. It is about pacing, as you said, because we're in it for the long term. And so being strategic with my voice and my opportunity of, is this a moment that's important for me? Or is it also important for me to encourage other people at the table? Especially, here's the gift. We're in a time where so many people are asking, how can I be an ally, right? What can I do? And so deploying allies is a wonderful, wonderful strategy. So it doesn't always have to be you, because sometimes we feel like if I don't say anything, no one will. And so being willing to use our voice, but also encouraging other people to do the same is very critical. And I will say a lesson I probably learned the hard way is learning the lay of the land. Sometimes we come in like guns blazing and we can miss an opportunity because we don't fully understand who the power players are or what is the history of this place, so that I can study and move forward with intention.
Wow. I could
Thank
talk
you.
to all, three of you women for the next couple of hours, but I've got to leave it there. I know Dr. Thema has a heart out, and I just want to thank you, Dr. Thema, for, bringing some clarity, some hope. I love what you said about not every place is the same. And it's very easy, I think, in this moment for us to get stuck and feel like we don't have, there's not going to be any place where we can, use our talent, our skills, our expertise, and at the same time be recognized, for the value that we bring to an organization. So glad, Ashley, you are in a good place. I just get super excited to hear that you are now, someplace where you feel nourished. And boy, Ella, you are just on fire. Keep writing those articles, keep inspiring women to tell those stories, because we know there's so much power in those stories. I just want to thank all of you for joining me this morning. This is such an incredible, inspiring conversation for me, and I know it's going to inspire so many other women. So again, thank you, ladies, and be safe out there.
Great.
Thanks again to my amazing guests. I just love being in the company of powerful Black women. And thanks to all of you for joining me today. Don't forget to follow me at Areva Martin, to follow Special Needs Network at Special Needs Network. And thanks to my incredible production team. Before I get out, I always want to leave you with some words to live by. No one can make you feel uncomfortable without your consent. My guests today and Black women all over the country are saying to big companies and brands, you do not have consent to make us feel uncomfortable, to minimize us, to ignore us, or to traumatize us. Women are reclaiming their power, and in doing so, they are confronting and calling out those companies that choose to profess their solidarity with Black Lives Matter and justice causes, but ignoring their own complicity in creating and maintaining the very structures that they are criticizing. The voices of these courageous women matter, and their advocacy is having a profound impact, from the founder of Refinery 29 resigning to beauty brands across this country donating millions of dollars to justice-focused institutions. And this is just the beginning. As more women share their stories, confront their oppressors, and demand change, companies have no choice but to heed their demands. From pay equity to parity in leadership, there is no turning back. So the next time someone asks you what they can do during this moment, tell them they can stand up, they can speak out, they can stand in solidarity with Black girls and Black women who are asking to be treated equally and fairly in the workplace. And please tell them, if they don't live the principle, then don't hashtag it for publicity. I'll see you on Wednesday, 9 a.m. We are talking about that really controversial topic, reparations. Some people say it's 40 acres and a mule. Be here to hear scholars debate the case for and against reparations. That's Wednesday at 9 a.m. Until then, be safe out there. And remember, we are all in this together.